And yes, a special good evening or good afternoon to Dr. Leslie and Noel. She's on the west coast of the United States, so she's early afternoon. We are early evening in the Eastern Caribbean. So we just want to say really how pleased and happy we are to have everybody here this afternoon for the final in the series. This has been a wonderful journey. It started on the 14th of May and it's taken us through 3 other webinars. We focus on music and entertainment and fashion and design, film and audiovisual. And now today, we are into a new territory. And we have someone special this evening to lead us through that conversation. So before I do talk a little bit about this afternoon, I just want to say we've had some, I would say close to 250 persons participating throughout this series. Some of you are returning for multiple webinars. And so we want to thank you, a great deal for being part of this journey. So those of you attending for the first time, welcome. And we expect this afternoon for us to have a stimulating conversation. Today's conversation is on design thinking. This is really part of a new design, a new thinking of how we in the Caribbean should look at ways to solve problems, ways to bring our communities together. And to lead us will be Dr. Noel. I will speak a little bit more about that in the next couple of minutes. So before I do, let me ask Mr. Ricardo James, who is the officer in charge of the OECS Competitive Business Unit. Our unit is the unit behind this series and other webinars to come in the next couple of weeks. So Ricardo, let me ask you to come and to say some words of welcome as well to the participants and to Dr. Noel.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. And may I ask our host to allow my camera to come on, because for some reason I cannot turn it on myself. But
yes, 1 second.
But while this is happening, good afternoon to everyone. As Subas mentioned, my name is Ricardo James. I am technical specialist for export development at the Competitive Business Unit, but also officer in charge of the unit. Let me just say it is indeed it's a pleasure for me to welcome all of you, to welcome our facilitator, Dr. Noel, and all the participants who have joined us for this final in a series of webinars that we have been organizing in this current era of COVID-19 pandemic. The first 3 webinars focused on the impact of COVID-19 on the creative sector and in 3 subsector areas. But today we are looking at the issue of design thinking. When I was putting my thoughts together just a little while ago in terms of the 5 minutes that I have, I decided to check Google for some quotes about design. And there are just a few of them. Have no fear, perfection, you will never reach it. Design is intelligence made visible. Everything is designed. You can't use up creativity. Design adds value faster than it adds costs. And the public is more familiar with bad design than good design. Unfortunately, I don't have the sources of these quotes, but I think they speak to the issue of how important design is in our lives, in whatever sphere of our existence or operation or business. Design is an important factor. The CBU, therefore, this afternoon has gathered creatives and regional thinkers, entrepreneurs, and others engaged in the productive enterprise to discuss the concept of design thinking. In the current environment in which we are living, the Caribbean and the OECS finds itself in need of finding creative and long-term solutions to help us to reset our society and economy in the aftermath of this terrible pandemic. And that requires collective thinking and action. And as we are searching to find new ways to reopen our economies. Using creative techniques is seen as a viable and long-term method for overcoming the impact of this pandemic. So we hope that this will further deepen the conversation and build on the body of ideas and solutions and expressions of support that have been emerging. And it is therefore anticipated that further dialogue with you and with our clients and stakeholders will allow us to capture some of the important things that we'll learn this afternoon, that we'll hear from our facilitator, on how we can apply the concept of design thinking in building our economies, in building our competitiveness, in building our trade and our exports. So let me thank once again Dr. Noel for agreeing to present to us this afternoon. She is volunteering her time, expertise, and qualifications. So we thank you very much for that. And we just hope that you, the participants, will be able to participate and be engaged. Those who have questions, you will be able to raise your hands using the feature or type in the chat questions and answer section. And your questions will be read out, or you will be called upon to speak your questions and to get an answer. So without further ado, let me just hand over to our host and wish us a very successful next 2 hours. So I'm very sorry that unfortunately I didn't try while I was speaking to put on my camera. But if I do, I will do it during the call. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo, for that. And so this afternoon, as I said, we have the great pleasure of having Dr. Leslie Noel, a native of Trinidad and Tobago, but a Caribbean lady, somebody whose talk has been rising recently. Certainly, she's done some wonderful work in the region, but personally and professionally, she has been able to do some really interesting things of late. She recently graduated with a PhD in design thinking in the United States, in North Carolina, and she's currently at Tulane University, New Orleans, United States, where she is a professor of practice there. But I just want to underscore the fact that Leslie Ann has been an inspiration. She has been a mentor to many of the persons involved in the design sector in the OECS in particular, because she's done work for the OECS Commission on a couple of occasions, one doing a study on the craft sector, and most recently, she did some work with designers of craft in the OECS online. So interestingly, so we actually started to pivot in that direction more than 2 years ago, because we recognized the fact that in order for us to be able to deliver more on the things that we do, we have to find innovative ways to address those things. So this afternoon conversation is really about trying to find innovative ways as a society, as a region, to bring us closer together, to be able to produce better, to be more efficient in the use of resources, but of course, to collaborate, to network, and to be able to see our Caribbean society rise. I remember a few years ago, I was in Guadeloupe, and I met a group of designers, and some of them, they were wearing this t-shirt called Ministry of Design. And I was very intrigued by that. I was like, what is a Ministry of Design? I mean, I know about Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Tourism and Finance and so, but I've never heard of Ministry of Design. And what the lead person in that group was Leslie Noel. And I say, okay, so what is that all about? So this afternoon, she will tell you and tell all of us what this expression of design thinking is all about. And then I know that she has said to me and to us that she's not talking merely about technology. She's talking about the broad use of thinking, of processes to solve problems. So this afternoon, she's going to take us on a presentation where we look at how we're going to envisage the Caribbean in the future and in post-COVID period, using more innovative ways, using ways from our own experiences to reset and to reopen our society and to be more progressive and productive. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming this afternoon, Dr. Leslie Ann Noel. Good afternoon, Leslie Ann, and welcome.
Thank you so much. Like after that kind of introduction, I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. But, you know, it's really nice that you refer to the Ministry of Design, which was a project that I had with my colleague, Michael Lipoy, where we really were trying to get people interested in design outside of fashion and, you know, more traditional applications of design. And so, I mean, you took me back to an interesting place back in 2015 when we were talking about this Ministry of Design. I think I'm still in that place, not I think, I am still in that place. I'm going to start sharing my screen where I want us to be thinking about design in a broader context than just maybe handicraft or fashion or so I put together a lot of slides. I have a lot of things to say. It's, you know, if this were a conversation, the conversation could go in many different directions. So I want people in this webinar to think of it as a fairly relaxed conversation. However, I cannot see, actually, I think I could still see the chat. I'm going to organize it so that I can see the chat because I want to make it a little interactive because that's the way I like things to go. Okay. So we have a title and we may stray from the title a little bit. We may keep on track. We'll be telling some stories and talking for a little while. So the title is Design Thinking, Envisioning Post-COVID-19 Futures in the Caribbean. And what I'm hoping to do is introduce people to design, to the concept of design thinking, which is something that a lot of us probably already use, but it might be new terminology. So I'll describe it a little bit and then I'll talk with people about how we could apply this in our personal lives, our work lives, and in our communities. We'll talk a little bit about why we might be interested in design thinking. And we will make sure that the conversation is a very Caribbean conversation because design thinking sometimes sounds like something that's very foreign. And I don't want people to think it's foreign because we're Caribbean people and we're pretty creative anyway. So to start, I am starting with a little bit of dancing, right? And I would love if people could just, this is a community check-in how y'all are feeling. Just type in one thing that you'd actually like to remain in place after this craziness is over. Because we're in this strange COVID-19 space, but maybe there's something interesting that came out of it. Maybe because it forced you to slow down, it forced you to check in with people. If people could just go into the chat box and type one thing that maybe was good out of all of this, and they wouldn't mind if things stayed that way after. So I'll give you all a second or two. Anybody chatting? Okay, yeah, Joe says a better planet. Marlene says she had to think outside of the box. I think, yes, it's really challenged our thinking. A time to focus on ideation and creativity, more time for studio. I have done so much reading in the last, how many ever weeks, online networking. That's another good thing. I've been in webinars in Scotland, in Australia, all of these kind of crazy places. Well, not crazy, but now I can do these things. Deborah says gets to stay in the studio, blended work modes, Zoom meetings, even though some of us are zoomed out. But, you know, I like to start here so that we think about, we don't start off thinking that this is all terrible. It is bad, but there is always something good. Less driving. And I'm going to go back to the chat and see what people said after this, okay? So just as a start, you know, I'm drawing on, I'm going to start off with something similar to what Ricardo was saying. And Ricardo, I really enjoyed your quotes, and maybe I'll try and get them from you afterwards. But design is everywhere, okay? And we don't often think about it, but it is all around us. So it's in the clothes that we wear, it's in the way that we organize our festivals or our movement, our dance. This is an outdoor activity in China, but look at the way the people have designed their movements. You know, think of the design work that went into actually making the activity happen. And the objects that we use, okay, so this is an application of design that people think about a little bit more. We think about objects. In the technology that we use, this is designed in the buildings around us. Okay, so this is a really exciting building. I don't recall where in Africa, but I love this design work. In the ways that our cities have been planned. Okay, this is a map of, I believe, New York, right? So think about the design involved in making the city happen. Okay, and even in things like this, in our landscape, someone designed this wall with all of with this garden, so that people could reuse waste materials and maybe even reuse the water and things like that. And even in things like farming and farms, you know, all of this stuff is designed, okay? So design is both visible and invisible. And here's some more, maybe more invisible design elements. So like this map of the subway system in the UK. This app, well, I don't know if to say the app is visible or invisible, we use it, but maybe we're not thinking about the way that we use it. But a designer went in and thought about the experience of somebody to create this app, okay? And then a new application of design at Stanford University, where I had the opportunity to work last year, there is a whole legal design lab where they are designing law around the needs of people, rather than saying, law is normally designed around precedent, where people say, okay, this is what happened, okay, and then this is what happened and this is the law. I'm not a lawyer, so lawyers, please don't destroy me in this. But in the legal design lab, what they're doing is they're talking with people and really trying to identify people's needs and then create solutions, legal solutions to respond to people's needs. And then they're testing and experimenting with these solutions and getting feedback, right? So this starts to give you a little bit of an insight into where design thinking work is going, right? So next question, what is design thinking? And a little more dancing, because I just like to see people dancing in videos, right? So I have on one side the image of these Post-it notes, because people very often link design thinking with Post-it notes, okay? I have the gentleman dancing, and then I have a tomato there. Because I have a little funny story about this tomato. I was doing a design thinking workshop, and actually, yes, the children were breakdancing in the workshop. So that's why this picture, this image of this man breakdancing is here. And I asked the children to think about things in their lives that needed changing. Okay, so these are sometimes the conversations that I have with people. And these, one child wrote down on a Post-it note, it might even be here in this list. The child wrote down tomatoes, and I'm like, okay, so what's wrong with tomatoes? He says, well, tomatoes are icky. I was like, okay. And however, this child now was trying to think, how could he design a solution that would allow him to eat vegetables, but not have to eat those icky tomatoes? That starts to give you a thing, another little insight into design thinking. So here's a definition. And there are many definitions, and there's no real consensus yet. Okay, so design thinking, this is a definition that we use at Tulane University where I work. So design thinking uses methods from design disciplines, social sciences, development studies, and more to address complex social issues. There isn't just one approach to design thinking, but it's always informed by users and context. And another one, design thinking is a collaborative, human-centered approach to creating innovation and social change, right? I have social in brackets because not all design thinking work is about social change, but it invariably leads to innovation and change. All right. So when I talk about design thinking, though, I try to get people to think beyond just a simple process, because if you look up design thinking, you'll find people talking about a lot of very specific processes. And I say that we are trying to borrow the way that designers think and do. Okay, so in the way that designers do, I suppose, no, in the way that designers think, maybe, we want people to use design thinking mindsets that will help them to be, or it means that they are curious, they're collaborative, they are creative, they're questioning, they're interested in change, they're responsive to people's needs. They're iterative, which means that you you do something over and over and over again. So those of you in this forum who are designers, you'll recognize this and you'll say that this is something that you do anyway. Somebody asks you to make, I don't know, make a handbag for them. You'll start drawing out a handbag and you'll come up with one design, and then you'll start to change it and you'll come up with another design. Or if you're a graphic designer, somebody asks you to make a poster for you, you will do one version of the poster, then you'll do a second version, a third version, a fourth version. So this is how we learn to work as designers. We use this repetitive or iterative process, and not everybody uses that. And now in business, they have found that this is actually a good process, right? So people who thought that you'd go nowhere with creative education, yeah, well, creative people, like, they kind of rule in the world right now, right? Another mindset that we want people to use is empathy, where designers really have to focus on the needs of people to be able to create a solution. Okay, so like when I studied design, actually, we didn't focus on people this much. We focused more on form and we focused on machinery and things like that. But today in design thinking, we talk about empathy and actually empathy in two ways. So the empathy in the focus on the people that we design for, or with sometimes, because sometimes it's co-design, and also empathy for the people that we work with, because design thinking doesn't normally happen alone. Normally we work in teams of several people to come up with a design together. And it's very active. So there is a think and do mindset in design thinking where you come up with an idea and then you try to test the idea. Same thing we saw just now in the legal design slide. We move quickly into action, whereas maybe in school we might have been taught, well, okay, we do all of this background research before we come up with something that's perfect, and then when it's perfect, we launch our product. In a design thinking way of working, we don't work like that. We are always trying to come up with a solution and then test the solution quickly, and then that solution that we're testing makes us move on to another idea. So if we go back to the handbag idea, if when somebody comes to me to design a handbag, I wait until this handbag is perfect in my mind before I actually make it, I'm gonna get a different kind of result than if I use this kind of experimental approach where I try out something quickly and I take it back to the person and I ask them, okay, how does this work? Do all of your stuff fits into this handbag? And then they'll give me the feedback and they say, no, this handbag is uncomfortable here. My computer doesn't fit into it. And then I'll go back to the drawing board and I'll try something else and I'll go back. And I'm always going back and forth. But using that iterative and active process, I'm going to come up with a better product. It might seem to some people that I have more failure, but actually I come up with something better in the end because I got more user feedback throughout the process than if I waited until the finish, until it was perfectly finished to show the public, right? I just thought of another example. Think about if you were ordering a wedding dress and the seamstress waited until the wedding dress was 100% finished to show the customer. The seamstress is running a lot, there are a lot of risks being taken there because the seamstress could be showing the customer a dress that is absolutely terrible. The customer hates it. It doesn't fit properly. It's too short, all of these problems. Whereas if the seamstress and the customer, if there are several fittings along the way and the customer is giving the feedback all along, we'll have better customer satisfaction. So that was a long explanation there. Another way that I talk about design thinking is I talk about it like curry, right? Where I say, imagine design thinking as curry, where we have a lot of different ingredients that go into this curry. So some of these ingredients are empathy, flexibility, relevance, a focus on the future. We didn't talk about that so much in the last slide. Critical awareness, meaning that we're aware of issues around us and social justice and things like that. pattern finding this. We're looking for patterns for us to be able to move forward. So like maybe when we start to get feedback, we'll get some patterns where we say, okay, our customers who are X age are telling us something. We'll find some patterns there. And openness. So in design thinking, we have to be open to trying things out. We have to be open to getting feedback. There is some optimism, multidisciplinarity, because we work with people from other disciplines, stick-to-itiveness, because we're trying to, we need some determination to stick to an idea and not just abandon it, some creativity, and I have cool, right? Because we have to add a little bit of, a little oomph to the design a little bit later, right? So all of these things are the types of things that we're trying to cultivate through design thinking. So we want people to think with a real openness around problems, but there are other ways to talk about it. So some people talk about the mindsets, and now I'll talk a little bit about the process, okay? So if you are a designer, you will recognize the process that I'm talking about in many different ways, okay? How do we design things? We try to understand the problem, or define the problem. Then we move into a design phase where we're brainstorming, coming up with ideas, maybe we're prototyping. Then we're testing it, where we are showing it to people and getting feedback, okay? And that is never the end of the design process, even though we might think it's the end. After we make the idea public, we have to be getting feedback. And it might mean that we have to go back to the design phase, we have to go back to the understand phase. So I like this description of the design thinking process, which is really simple, just 3 steps. Here is another depiction of the design thinking process, which is actually pretty famous. This is from the D School at Stanford, where they talk about empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. So if you Google design thinking, you'll probably find this model. And I actually added these other, what are these, hexagons, octagons, I don't know, these other figures in the middle, where I wanted to demonstrate to my class that even though it's a 5-step process, the empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test, it's not a linear process. And so when you reach somewhere along the phase, you might have to go back somewhere else. And you might have to go back to the start, or you might have to just go back to the step before. This is another description of the design thinking process, and this is from the Design Council in the UK, where they talk about discover, define, develop, and deliver. But again, if you're a designer, you know that this is what you do. You understand the problem, you then, you define what area of the problem you're gonna focus on. You, I can't see the whole screen, right? Then you move into a brief, you develop some solutions, then you deliver some solutions that work, okay? And then you might have to go back into the process again, okay? IBM has a different process where they use this little loop to describe design thinking: observe, reflect, make. And yes, so those are the models. There are actually even other descriptions. And then when I work with people, because I'm very, I'm all about, I have an area of research called decolonizing design. So I don't want people to think that, okay, this design process comes from outside. When I work with people, particularly like in the Caribbean or different communities, I ask people to define their own design process. So you tell me what your process is and let's discuss it, so that people know that they have the flexibility to create a design process. But this one is one that I like, okay? So in design thinking, we are then trying to promote designerly ways of thinking and doing. And why are we trying to do this? We're trying to do this because the fairly structured process helps us get through the problem, get through to a solution. Because when you are, again, a designer, you know that sometimes you don't have the luxury of thinking, okay, I'm not inspired and I can't find a solution. So going through that process, like understand, design, and test, helps you to actually move through a problem and get to a solution. And what we know in design, and I'll broaden it from there. We also know this from art education and some other types of creative education. What we know is that there isn't one solution. So in this design thinking process, we're trying to move us forward so that we're moving into action and we will get somewhere rather than us just stopping and not doing anything at all, right? We're trying to create growth mindsets. So one thing we talk about a lot in design thinking, when we introduce people who are non-designers to design thinking, they always talk about how they have to become comfortable with ambiguity. They have to become comfortable with change. And in education and psychology, we talk about a growth mindset, which means that the person who is open to new possibilities. And so exposure to design thinking or working in a design thinking way means that we become open to change. Okay, we move away from the fixed mindset that we might have had from other parts of our education. And we know that we're going to have a lot of ambiguity and change ahead of us. So it is probably a good thing if we all become more comfortable with it. You know, everything has changed. Life is different. So here, design thinking is not just for designers. I teach non-design students. And I lead them through the design thinking process. Sometimes I frustrate them because I ask them to draw and to do very creative things that they're not accustomed to doing. But the idea is I am trying to get them both to understand the process, and I'm trying to get them comfortable with change and trying to help them to become more flexible, more solutions minded. And so all of that is what we are doing in design thinking. Okay, so I do the design thinking in a slightly different way. So what we saw before, except for the curry part, a lot of it you'll find in any design thinking kind of textbook. The curry is my thing because I'm a Caribbean person or Trinidadian, and we talk about curry a lot. But I do design thinking in a different way, because I have to think about my own positionality. So who am I? I am not the same kind of design thinking, I'll say expert, but I'm looking for another word. I'm not the same kind of design thinking person as maybe the person who grew up in the States and studied in the States, or grew up in England. Or I have to think about, okay, so who am I? I am a little Black girl from Trinidad, right? And I then have to see how I could make design thinking, this obviously is not Trinidad, but I describe Trinidad sometimes like this, and I describe all of our islands like this, as these little rocks in the middle of the ocean. How do we make this design thinking stuff relevant to people like us? Okay, and I work in the United States, and I have similar kinds of questions when I'm talking to students of color, when I'm talking to non-American students. It's like, how can the design class or the design thinking class make more sense to us and our issues? So the way I do design thinking is a little bit different. I included this picture because this is what typically happens when I go to a conference, where you look through the room and you're like, okay, so where is the one little spot of color in the entire conference? And I'm there. Maybe somebody sees me in the picture, but there's normally like one person of color, or maybe one person. Well, there's never anyone else from the Caribbean at these conferences, or hardly ever. And so our kind of design experience is probably going to be different. So I do our classes in a different way. So the words that I like to use, I think I do design thinking through a critical and emancipatory lens. So I'm going to make a few invitations to everyone here throughout the workshop to think about things in a critical and emancipatory way. So what is critical? I like to share this quote, which is a West African proverb. No, what is emancipatory? Sorry. And this one is, until the lion has his or her own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. And so I try to create then a design experience that is from the lion's perspective then, or our perspective, which might not be always seen or heard. You know, very typically design classes might have somebody from outside coming to work with people from another country and trying to save them. I try not to work like that, and I try to see how we can create experiences that make sense to the people of the place. How can we co-create experiences that make sense to the people of the place? And then I try to make, I try to always infuse a little bit of critical theory in the classes that we do, where we think about things like power and history and ideology and, you know, all of these forces that ground the work that we do. And we're good at things like this in the Caribbean. I have experimented with different kinds of design curriculum. So I think design curriculum is about asking the right questions, trying to make sense of things, creating concepts, prototyping, and then communicating. And then all of these little words outside, I think, also affect the design curriculum that we create in the curriculum, in the Caribbean, which will be different. It will look good, different to design in the US or in Europe. Another thing that I add to the way that I try to practice design thinking is I use something called critical utopian action research, really big words, but 3 very simple questions where I ask people what is wrong. So I don't ever go in and say, okay, this is what's wrong, but I ask people, what do you think is wrong? Where do we want to go? And then how can our dreams become reality? And how then do we create that roadmap to get to reality? So this is a different kind of design thinking approach. Where I'm asking people to dream a little bit. And this shows you, this very detailed drawing shows you how I created some design thinking workshops for some children in a village called Moruga in Trinidad, where I asked them these questions. What's wrong? Same questions I just said. Where do we want to go? How can our dreams become reality? But I tried to make sure that the class I was doing with them was participatory. Effective, meaning that they had space to show their emotions and all that. Problem posing, situated, multicultural dialogic. All of these principles come from Ira Shaw, who is, I'll call him a philosopher, that might not be the right word, but he is a proponent of critical pedagogy, which is education that, I'll simplify it to say education that creates thinkers. So education where people can contribute to the education rather than just consuming education. So I try to do this in design as well. As I said a little earlier, I try to give people some space to dream. I keep in mind, I ask people about utopia and I ask them, what is their utopia? And I keep in mind this quote by Toni Morrison that says, all utopias are people who are described by people who are not allowed in. And I recognize that we in the Caribbean might be the people who aren't allowed in, or sometimes the students of color who I'm working with, they are the ones who are not allowed in. The children in Moruga in Trinidad who I worked with might not be allowed into mainstream Trinidad. So I try to create these kinds of spaces in the design classes that I do. I try to keep these kinds of issues to the forefront. You know, what does success look like for the people I'm working with? What does empowerment look like? You know, how am I working in a way that ensures that people feel empowered and people don't feel oppressed? So like I use some of these little word phrases or word games to help me think through this. And actually this ends up being an element of design thinking as well, that people do use a lot of these. We call these Mad Libs. So I use these Mad Libs to help me create my design thinking work. This is another one that I use where I say I'll say design work shifts power from someone to the next one. So I'll be a little provocative and say like, okay, my design work shifts powers from Sobas and the OECS to the artisans who I'm working with by allowing the artisans to co-create the curriculum with me or something like that. So I keep these things in mind to make sure that the design work that I'm doing is different and is relevant to the people, our people in the region. And then I also keep in mind the Sustainable Development Goals, just because this provides a really easy framework for for me to frame my classes around. You know, when I brought this into my class in Tulane, they were like, okay, so what are these sustainable development goals? And I said, well, okay, we don't just do design for design's sake. Let's do design that focuses on, for example, goal number, we just focused on one about water. So maybe goal number 14, life about water. Or no, it was goal number 6 that we just focused on, access to clean water and sanitation. And my students had to design solutions related to that. Or the semester before, we focused on a different goal. And actually, so all of my classes, if any of you are going to join my classes, if we pick a goal and focus on design, design that helps address the sustainable development goals. So design that really helps move our community forward, okay? And again, I mean, you'll hear me talking about dreaming all the time because I found ways to weave Black Panther into my design thinking conversation where people have a chance to just dream about life in a different way. And if we have the space to dream about it, then we could start to design a way to get there. So, you know, I will throw out these kinds of questions. So the way I do design thinking is different because yes, we're going through the process, but my process is a very zigzag process where I'm asking people to think about things like that. Their positionality, meaning who they are. I want them to dream. I want them to learn to do creative things and all of that to eventually come up with many solutions, and some of which are pretty good. So how do we put this into practice? So this is where I'm gonna ask people to chat again, right? So let's take a quick look at the process, one of the processes. So understand, I live in New Orleans well, I'm not even in New Orleans at the moment, but I do live in New Orleans. So New Orleans it's considered the northernmost Caribbean city. So I force the Caribbeanness into my classroom. Okay, my class at Tulane is not a very diverse class, and I force my students to have to really confront New Orleans and its Caribbeanness, even though it's not really Caribbean, it's Blackness, it's poverty, it's, you know, I really force the students to have to engage with this space. So this mural in the background is a mural in New Orleans. So understand. So this is the way I might introduce people to a design thinking project, where the first step is understand. And so I'll give them this kind of problem and say, well, our human, design thinking is also sometimes called human-centered design. So our human is Zion, age 12, and he's at home because of the coronavirus, and he's cut off from friends, schools, parks, etc. Zion here is my child, whose name is not Zion, and who has not given me permission to share his picture, but I'm his mother, so you know how Caribbean mothers are, so he's in my presentation, right? So what do we have to try to understand? We have to try to understand Zion's needs, behaviors, contexts, cultures. We have to understand the system that supports him, the system that's keeping him back. All of these things, we have to spend a lot of time understanding the context, right? Sometimes I ask people, like when I gave this design challenge, I recognized that my students might not actually know a Zion, but then I allowed them to choose someone within Zion's network, his teacher, his mother, his grandfather, the baby sister. What I want them to do is to really talk with somebody and not to imagine what they think the person needs. So that's an important thing about design thinking. We talk about empathy all the time, and we don't want people to imagine what they think the person's point of view is. We want people to actually go out and talk to people. And so if I bring it back to the design of more concrete things, if I was designing a chair for somebody, let's say I'm designing a rocking chair for a grandmother who has to babysit her 2 kids, her 2 grandkids. I can't sit down in my chair, my place at home and say, well, what does this grandmother need? And just imagine it. I need people to actually go out and talk to a grandmother and really hear those issues, to be able to understand it well. So this is really what, when people talk about design thinking, this is like the biggest step, this empathy part of it. And even if you are designing more traditional items, I encourage you to think about that you really have to be able to empathize with people by going out and talking with them to design the products, rather than you just sitting down and say, hey, what would this person, I think this person needs this. If we're talking about souvenirs, which we won't need for a while, right? I think this person needs this keychain, so I'm going to design it for them. That doesn't work. You really have to go out and talk with people to design it, right? Here's what people came up with in this workshop that I did last week. I think we did this workshop where we, as a group, started to think about what were Zion's concerns. Zion misses going to places like the movies and where his friends are. He misses his teacher. He misses not being able to see friends. He doesn't have good internet. He's worried about his grades. He's bored. He's thinking about what will summer look like. Scared of the virus, misses other important adults like grandparents. When we looked at Zion's mom, we started to talk about these things. What does she miss? His education and access to education, the social interactions, mental well-being. She might be dealing with loss and technology. Another way I get people to do empathy work is I ask them to think of feelings as messengers, which is a concept that we borrow from some equity training that we do at Tulane. And I ask people to ask the people that they're interviewing questions that really evoke emotions, or ask people to use emotional language when they are describing their responses, so that we use those emotions to really understand people's concerns, okay? Like Zion's teacher might have these concerns. Does he have a supportive home environment for homeschooling? Is he learning anything? Does he have enough food? Does he have internet? Is there release for his social or non-school energy? Will he have to take care of his sister? Is he scared? And things like that. So we really try to understand people. And then after, we have to move into define phase. And this is actually a really difficult phase. It seems easy, but we're trying to, this part is what I just talked about. I try to learn and find out what evokes emotional responses for people, particularly what causes them pain and what brings them joy. Because what causes them pain is the thing that we can use to act on in our design. And then what brings them joy, we know that this is a good feeling that they have, and we can do the same thing by trying to see how can we prolong this joy. And so I'm talking about us trying to design a solution for Zion, but I'll show you throughout the talk that we could use those same questions for anything that we're designing, whether it's an object, whether it's a service, festival, things like that. You know, if we think about pain and joy and trying to use that as a design tool. So this is a way that we try to figure out which question to focus on. We'll say like our user, actually I'll just go to the next slide. So our user Zion needs a way to, and we might have heard something in either the pain points or the joy. We heard a need from what he said. So our user Zion needs a way to communicate with his friends because of, because his family, or in spite of, but because his family is following stay-at-home orders. How might we support communication for Zion while he's at home during quarantine? And so this now gives us a real statement to act on. What we sometimes find in design, and again, I'll say design at any level, so design at product, design at service, design at community festival, what we sometimes find is that we are not really responding to a need. We are just making something that we think needs to be made. You know, if it's a product, it could be, oh, I just had this fabric and I decided to make something. I mean, I decided to make an apron out of this fabric, but actually, did we even hear anybody with a need for the apron? Or it could be like a community program that the government designed some new education program, and they say, well, we just created this program because I know how these things go. The EU has whatever funding available, so we just decided to create it. But did we actually hear the need for it? So that maybe now you're starting to see that the design elements actually follow regardless of what we're designing, whether we're designing objects, posters, programs, education. So that's when I talk about design thinking, that's kind of how I'm looking at it, that we're using this process for many different things. So anyway, after we went to, I'll just go back a little bit. So after we create our statement that we're going to focus on, then we could move into design phase and not before. And so that's something that I've learned to be better at over particularly the last 5 years, where I used to maybe move into design phase a little bit quickly. And now I know that I have to develop a good problem statement based on something that I heard before I move into design phase. And then, yes, I'm going to move into quick prototyping again. So here are some things that came out of that workshop that I did with the students, where they thought of ways to help Zion connect with his friends. He could do drive-by play dates where he somehow they're playing through the window in the car or something like that. He could virtually connect with the friends. They could have chairs across the street from each other. They could visit through a glass window. They could call and FaceTime and text. They could make videos, send photo postcards, have lunch together over Zoom dates and parties where the kids dress up, make stuff like art projects to drop off for other people, write letters. And the one that everybody voted on that I thought was really nice, so those orange things were their votes, build a hugging suit so that people could go back to a mode where we can touch each other. And so after we come up with our design, we have to test. And testing can mean many different things. It could mean that we make a prototype and we go out and we test it. So we make a hugging suit and we go out and we test it. It could be that we talk with people about the concept. It could be that we are trying to see if people could fund the concept, but we have to find a way of getting feedback on this idea that we've had. So the reality is that our lives will never be the same, or they certainly won't be the same for the next 3 to 5 years. And so it might be time for us to redesign our lives. And so I think that again is another example of why it's a good time to talk about design thinking, right? So for the people who are designers in this webinar, some of our traditional areas in design won't be the same for a long time, and we're going to have to get creative. But I want you to embrace the fact that you have skills that are very transferable to other disciplines. You know, like I went from being a designer to a management consultant. I mean, it wasn't an overnight thing. And eventually I did a degree in management, but it was that people were saying to me all along that they liked my organizational skills as a designer. You know, as a designer, you are a project manager because you're managing, particularly if you are a designer who works with a lot of other people, you have to manage a lot of people in to get something produced, okay? Another thing that I used to hear, I used to be a professor, a teacher, a lecturer at UE, and another thing that I used to hear, which I'm sharing again with the designers in the room, the creative people in the room, so that you understand that you have creative ability that is desirable and transferable to other sectors, is that people used to tell me that the graduates from the creative program, I used to teach in the visual arts program at UE, and whenever they hired our graduates, even if they were hiring them to be like clerks or, so they were hiring them in non-creative roles, but they always used to say, you know what, the graduates from this program are different, okay? And it's only after I really got into design thinking that I that stuck with me, but I couldn't figure out what it was. But then after I started doing a lot of this reading and talking and experimenting more with design thinking, I started to understand what it was that these employers were saying. It's that the designers / the creative people, because it's same for a lot of other creative people, were taking risks that maybe the non-creative people weren't willing to take, you know, because when you are a designer and someone tells you something like, well, let me see what kind of problem people might give. I'll come back to furniture because I used to design furniture. So those examples are easy for me. When a client comes to me and says, oh God, just make a table for me. That is actually, it sounds like a simple question, but it's actually a very complex question that you then as a designer start working out in your head. Okay, so what does this person like? What are the other things in the person's house? How will I get the table to match what's already there? How will I get the table to show a little bit of my own identity? How to make the table within the amount of money that the person has stipulated? And so that's a really, really complex type of question that you learn to work through as a designer, that not every other person gets that kind of experience through their education or their work experience. So actually what I'm saying, the designers in the room could jump in the chat and cheer me on when I say this, and other people could say no. I'm saying that the design people have a superpower that other people need to get, okay? And I'm sorry if I'm annoying people who are not designers, but let's move on to this question about how might we use this in our personal lives. So I want us to think about what is the future that we want, okay? Here is a nice little drawing that I got from one of the kids in my workshop in Moruga in Trinidad, where I said, I asked them to think about the schools that they want, the future that they wanted, and how would they design the school to give them more access to human rights. And this child decided that she's going to design a school that, in her design, she wanted to get greater access to the right to go to school. So if I go back to the last one, it's like she was trying to think of what is the future that she wanted. She wanted more school. And then she actually put that into practice. And so we could think about this time that we're in with COVID, where we start to think about things that weren't working for us anyway. And then what's the difference? You know, where is it that we want to go? You know, or we could think of the pain points. Where was the pain point initially in a specific thing, right? If you are living in, I don't know what example to use. Well, I'll tell you about a friend of mine who has had a pretty good job for a really long time, and he never thought about changing the job because the salary is good and all that. But COVID actually put him in a place where he started to think, well, okay, this is actually not a job I want. This is not what I want to do. And he had now the space to think about where he wants to go. And all of a sudden, he is now doing this, has really thrown himself into this distance education because he was able to focus on a new target thanks to this pandemic that we're all living in. And then how can our dreams become reality is the same thing, where he was able to say, oh, I really want to be X. Like my son really wants to be a musician. And all of a sudden we were able to create a path for him to do that. And so that means that we can use this approach in our own lives. So I am going to ask you, you don't have to put in all three. I'm going to ask you to envision, this I want you to do as homework, but you can share some of your homework along the way with us. So envision 3 different scenarios for where you want to be post COVID-19 and describe what you want, what you need to do to get there. And I'm going to give you another slide with a few more instructions. So audience challenge number 1, where are some of the pain points and highlights in your life? And what scenarios will eliminate the pain points or ensure the highlights? What's the map that will get you there? So any of the 58 people in the room could just jump in and think about, okay, so where is it that you really want to be in a year's time after the world has come back together? And I'll stop and take a sip of water, and hopefully someone would have jumped in and typed something. Well, Kyron, I see your name, so maybe you could type something, where you want to be in a year's time. And then ideally, if we're taking this design thinking approach, I'm asking you to think of 3 different scenarios. So like in my own case, in a year's time, there are 3 different possibilities. Let me think, what are the 3? So one possibility is that I will be back in Trinidad in a year's time. And then I could start to think through, so if I'm in Trinidad in a year's time, what is it that I want to happen there? And then I could start designing my trajectory to get there. Doing what I love, Deborah says. So Deborah now has to drill down a little bit more and think, okay, so what is it that I love? And then start to figure out, how do I design my life around this thing that I love, okay? And there is actually a course, Kyron says, operating on a virtual platform with e-commerce operations accessible worldwide. So good, we put something, putting my art online, says Deborah. So, you know, this starts to give us some concrete focus. This is what's really good about design. I'll say this is the beauty of design, that it gives us something to focus on. And then now we can start figuring out, okay, how do we get there? So if Deborah wants to put her art online, well, maybe Deborah and Kyron need to work together, right? So Deborah's putting her art online, but Kyron is selling it, right? But if we figure out this is what we want to do, then we could start getting the steps, and you could limit the number of steps, because design is good when we have constraints. So we say, how do I get to that point in 10 steps, right? Hillary says, more focus on my online business. Again, so we think, we could think, what's going to be the result of that focus? And then what are the 10 things we need to do to get there, right? So like in my own case, I've worked in many different areas of design. I want more graphic design skill. And I started to think, well, okay, when this pandemic ends, I have to be much more skilled in X area of this graphic design. And by putting that in my mind, it helped me sign up for some online courses. I watch more tutorials. I actually watch now Adobe Illustrator tutorials, like if I'm watching Hulu on YouTube. So I'm really going to end this pandemic with a lot more skill. I haven't moved to the actual trying new stuff, but you know, it gives you something to visualize on, and then we know how to get there. I'm seeing some more interesting things, like Janine says, to be one of the virtual creative producers, top virtual, right? Good. And so we can start to figure out what that means. Implementing a community wellness program. I really like that, Talifa. Deborah says, yes, determine what the focus is, and that is true. Because the other thing too is that what your big plan is has to also be doable and manageable. And there's actually a really famous article about design that says that actually is one of the skills of designers, that we know how to make our tasks manageable. So we'll start off with the unmanageable. It's called a wicked problem. We'll start off with the wicked problem of designing the table, which people don't understand it's a wicked problem, but it's a wicked problem because it has all of these crazy parts to it. And then eventually we make it a manageable problem because we've determined who it's for, what it must cost. So along the way, we have to learn to limit things, okay? All right, so I'm gonna move on. I'm enjoying reading people's comments though, right? Next question. How might we use this design thinking thing? I say this design thinking schminking thing, because it sounds like fancy newfangled language. And I'm sure that there's somebody in the webinar who's saying, but this is the stuff I do all the time. And yes, this is the stuff that some of us do all the time. It's just that this is the kind of fancy-ish name that's getting famous. But it's good if you recognize that this is something that you do all the time, because this also means that you can help other people think this through, okay? So how might we use this in our business or professional lives? Let's go to the next slide. So some changes that we have to expect post-COVID-19. I'm excited and distracted now by Lynn and live comedy theater shows to online television audiences. I want that, Lynn. Right? So some things we have to look forward to, or not look forward to, some things that we have to anticipate post-COVID. There will be a radical change in international tourism till at least 2023. So for all of us who make souvenirs, who have a tourism-based product, it means that we have to rethink everything. And no, I don't have any answers. I'm just telling you the reality, okay? We're gonna move into a new low-touch economy, which means that people won't want to touch anything. And that creates some challenges for some of the things that we already do, but it also will create some opportunities because we will find that there are businesses that can be created around the fact that people can't touch or don't want to touch things. So here where I am in the States, there is a huge amount of work for people who will do shopping for other people, right? Because somebody like me, I have not been in a store since maybe the 13th of March because I am only using these services where I am collecting my groceries at the curbside because I don't want to go into the store. I don't want to touch anything, right? So that's the kind of opportunities that I mean. People are re-evaluating what is important. And that creates another opportunity because it could be that we play a role in helping people reevaluate, or it could be that when they think about what's important, somehow we could play a role in supporting that, them getting what is important. There are going to be changes in the gathering, work, school, social life, etc. So in our businesses, we have to just recognize that all of these things are coming, all right? Here are some pain points, but when you talk to other people about pain points, you're going to find others that maybe you as a business can somehow support. And I always emphasize to people that it's okay to change your business, you know? So like people always say, but what if people leave? Well, I'll come back to handicraft. You know, someone will say, well, what if people leave handicraft? We have to stay in the industry. Some people will have the skills to be able to move to other industries, or some people will, even without having the skills, some people will identify opportunities in other industries, and we have to support them to take those, to fill those opportunities. So some pain points that we have now and that we will have for the next couple of months, years, safe access to food. Whether it's in like a grocery or in a super grocery or restaurant, or food is going to be a big issue, right? Childcare, connecting with people, online overexposure and online fatigue is another issue. Less physical contact. When you talk to people, you're going to find lots more pain points, but you will also find those are where the opportunities are. So my audience challenge number 2, where are some of the pain points and highlights of your customers? How can you help eliminate the pain points or ensure the highlights? What's the map to do this? So for those of you with businesses, I would love if you could jump in and think about what you've heard people talking about as problems over the last, let's say, 8 weeks, or since March 13th, I consider is when this drama really clicked into high gear. So what are some of the things that you really hear a lot of people complaining about since then? And then maybe there's a way that your business can intervene in this, in eliminating the pain points or ensuring the highlights. Janine, I think money is, I'm going to say it's too big. Money is a problem. It's a huge problem, but I would want to scope that pain point a little bit more for us to be able to respond to it, even though it is a problem, yes. Food insecurity is a big deal. I'm watching people's comments. Expense management, yes, is a pain point. So I'm thinking how to make these pain points even more basic so that we could start to think of things that people could respond to. Like I had a conversation the other day with a friend where he was complaining. So this is one thing that we have to learn as designers too. Oh, that trying on clothing is real. Okay. As designers, we have to learn to hear things even if people aren't talking directly to us. Okay. So my friend was complaining that he had gotten a letter from his bank saying that he needed to call them or come in and fix something. And he said, I'm not going anywhere right now in COVID-19. And, you know, if I was the bank manager now, I need to be picking up on those things and hearing what people are saying, where don't ask them to come into the bank. Even I got a letter like that from my bank where they were asking me for proof of something. And I bank in Trinidad and I'm not there, you know, and I said, this is an impossible time for you to be asking me for proof of something. And it's really that how are they going to create services that keep me out of the bank? Because right, that's a good one, Adele Rupchan. The long lines outside of businesses, that's a really big pain point. And I'm laughingly going to think of this meme that I saw. You'll probably have seen it, where it's probably in India, where people have left their shoes in the circles, in the spots, while they wait for their space in the line. And that then becomes a way of possibly solving a pain point, you know. So like if you had a business, you would think, okay, so how can I ensure that people are waiting, but I reduce the pain of them having to stand in line outside of the business, you know, or what's the way to make that more comfortable, or something like that. Okay. All right, so how might we use this in our, ours repeated, in our communities? So I'm gonna share my lovely kids in Moruga doing their research with the security guard at their school, where they interviewed these adults, again, to find out about pain points in the community. What were the things that the adults loved about the community? What were the things that the adults didn't like? Where were the problems? Where were the highlights? And then after they moved into design high gear. So this was really cool to watch. I, as the teacher, was able to just step back and watch these kids take the lead and talk with these people about life. And also, so if there are any educators in the room, you might enjoy this part of the conversation. This was also really nice to see the children taking control of their own education, and they felt that they were very involved because they got to talk to these big people, and the big people had to listen to them. And so this to me is empowering education, right? And this is one of the designs that I really love, where one of the kids spoke with somebody who hated going to church, but after they dug into it a little bit more, it wasn't just that this person hated going to church, is that the person didn't really want to wake up early in the morning and get ready to go to church, but wanted the whole experience of church. So my lovely little, my 12-year-old friend designed this free Skype church app where people could stay home and go to video church. And look at where we are now, right? So we are exactly in video church space, but this child designed this in 2017, listening to the concerns of people in the community. So I really like design thinking for this kind of community element. In New Orleans, we did this really interesting workshop with the New Orleans Police Department, where we did a workshop with 12 police officers and 12 community members, where we were asking, can we use design and the future to build shared experiences between the police and the community? And we spent an entire day trying to get the two groups of people to understand each other, and then to co-create solutions that would help make their relationship a little bit better. So make the police less suspicious of people in the community and make the people in the community less suspicious of the police. So this is the space that I operate in right now, which is design thinking for social innovation, where we're trying to see how we can make life better in the community. So my challenge then for the audience, number 3, is, again, where are some pain points and highlights of people in your community? So let's start with, maybe let's get a few highlights. And then after we could get some pain points, but maybe 1 or 2 people could type in some highlights. And then if you can't think of highlights, you could put in some pain points. But this is what I intend to do. I'm starting a design thinking class in Trinidad later this week. And this is what we're actually going to do. So I see Michael Bonnick. Hi, Michael. Says service design can help tackle the new wicked problem, social distancing. Exactly. And although it's a necessary solution in response to the pandemic, many businesses are now challenged with the task of using real data and the design process to remain agile and responsive in this new business landscape. Yes, and so that's really what we're doing. We're using the service design process. So like when people ask me about design thinking, all of these names start to overlap. Service design, design thinking, user experience, and human-centered design, all right? Using public transport is a big pain point that we have to think about. So it would be interesting to see how could we co-create some solutions to help this public transport system work better in today's environment. And so we have a nice example of Angostura in Trinidad responding to need. They moved into the producing hand sanitizers. Pain points in Dominica, purchasing groceries, public transportation, highlights access to fresh produce. And that's a good one to highlight. So people, so I live in the States right now, and people enjoy farmers markets. I think it's the same thing in Trinidad as well, where people enjoy going to some of the farmers markets. They enjoy going to Green Market. I know Namdevco, I think, well, I know, and I think Namdevco has a market. I've never been to that one. But now we can think, how can we get people to enjoy this market experience, this outdoor market experience, while social distancing and addressing, so we're addressing their need for food, and we're thinking about the social distancing requirements, but there's a big opportunity there. And actually in New Orleans, where I live, the farmers markets, and I think here in California, where I am currently, the farmers markets have done very well, because it means that people can go out and people can get some exercise, can go out, they can get their food without the kind of risk involved in them going into the supermarkets. So Janine, yes, a highlight is that we now have less traffic, and then the design thinking question that we could be trying to co-create is that how do we continue to have less traffic after we've gone back to normal, whatever the new normal is. And we need to create some social distancing mechanisms. So you see that in this tiny experience, we have been able to see some of the benefits of design thinking, you know, working in a collaborative way. We're getting a lot of information from people in a short space of time, because that's another benefit of working collaboratively like this. And then we could then move into a brainstorming mode to figure out how could we co-create some solutions that then we could start to move towards, okay? These are very juicy comments that I would love to read forever. I want to share, before we move into Q&A, another way of using design thinking that I am getting involved in at Tulane. I threw out a challenge to all of my colleagues, faculty at Tulane, to see how they could use the creative approaches that we use in design thinking in the work that they do. And I actually got some buy-in from a professor of Latin, another professor in African policy, a math professor, an art education, well, art and design are pretty close. I'm probably forgetting one other professor, but this, the math one and the Latin one are the ones that really stand out for me as highlights. So the Latin professor turned her entire class into a design class, but a design class around Latin. So she introduced the design problem at the start of the semester. The problem was, how can we get inner city kids in New Orleans interested in Latin? And then his students designed games around Latin to introduce the children to this, this new information. And so that was a very exciting class. And then this other class, this professor also said, well, how can we use design thinking to help students understand ordinary differential equations? Me, I'm not a math person. Or at least I thought I was not a math person. I had no idea what ordinary differential equations were. But we created an entire design thinking class where we use now the future element of design, and we really went over the top. We turned the class into a future scenario in 2070, where we asked the students to design solutions to convince a city why they needed to understand ordinary differential equations, right? I mean, it's hard for me to explain it in this workshop, but I want you to see that even using a design thinking approach, we could be redesigning education. We could actually be redesigning many aspects of our lives, right? So I think this might be my last slide where I do my little superhero thing, which is just to say, yes, we as designers / design thinkers, as creative people, people might have thought we were the dancey ones in school, but actually we can save the world. Yay. And I think that's, yeah, so that is, now we open to some Q&A, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and maybe Sobas could help us with some Q&A.
Good. Thank you for that. So I don't want to make any comments now, so I'll leave the comments for the participants. But you can, if you want to ask a question, you can raise your hands. There is a raise your hands feature that you can get in there, and raise your hand, and then we will unmute you to allow you to ask a question. I see we have Hillary Gabriel. I don't, Mrs. Gabriel, you want to ask a question still? I know your hand has been up for a while. So others, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, so we can hear your voices, so you can do that. So just raise your hands and we will call on you to speak. So, Mrs. Gabriel, are you joining us with a question, Mrs. Gabriel?
Yes, Sobas. Good evening to everybody. And I want to thank you again for affording me the opportunity to be part of this webinar. And thanks to Dr. Noel for giving us all of that food for thought. It's not really a question, but it's just a comment. I love the way in which Dr. Noel presented to us this evening, as per usual, because it teaches us that design does not really speak to one particular thing. And I think it's timely because when we are not out of the woods yet with COVID-19, it gives us an opportunity to rethink, relook the business, especially me. For instance, the type of business that I do, I have to relook and rethink because I'm more focused on the tourism sector. So I got a lot of food for thought, and I have a lot of work to do. I think I have to look at my journey map. No, I definitely have to. And I mean, I'm really happy for the opportunity. And I must say, you presented in a format that we could all understand. And I think most of us, if I can speak for my other colleagues, could really build this into our business. Thank you.
And
Thank
you
you
still
for
working on
having
your
me.
journey map? Are you guys working on your journey map?
Yes, I did one just not too long ago for something, and I'm still, preparing something because I have to share, but I am involved in so much different things. But I mean, it's nothing that Dr. Noel teaches you goes in the dustbin.
Oh, wow. So for people who don't know, we did a design workshop last year or the year before. Last year, yes. And
Last year.
so a journey map is actually a design thinking tool that people use. So Hillary, you could enter any design thinking conversation, and when they say a journey map, you'll say, yeah, I know what a journey map is. But a journey map is us trying to follow a person's journey throughout a given period of time. Like it could be a day, it could be a week. And then we are noting things along the journey that are significant that we could somehow use in our design process. So that's what the journey map is, just sharing that with everybody. And I actually have, so I mean, I should make an invitation that people can connect with me on LinkedIn, right? Because I shared today on LinkedIn, 2 of my students, they did a really interesting exercise where they did personal journey maps. Right now they were thinking of this COVID-19 phase that we're in, and they compared their 2 personal journey maps to try to understand when was a good time to connect with the other person, because they were just reflecting on the fact that people are in this kind of anxious state. Sometimes they reach out to people and it's not a good time to reach out to people. So even something like a tool that we use normally to understand a client, you could be using it to understand yourself and the people around you a little bit better. I see someone else has joined. Janine is going to say something.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Noel, and to the OECS Competitive Business Unit. You mentioned in your presentation something that really kind of resonated with me. How will I get to tell the tale to show my own identity? In other words, in the design process, we may feel as designers, and just to be upfront, by training, I'm not a designer, I'm a marketing publicist / type person, but I have found myself having to incorporate a lot of the design process elements in marketing ideation. So that's why I came to the session today, to see how that can inform what I am about to do in terms of my business, Black Collar Creative Limited. So putting yourself in your projects, that's such a tricky thing for me, because a lot of my spark of ideation and marketing comes not only from instinct, of course, academics and the marketing processes, but you also want to kind of push the boundaries of what you can do in marketing. You want to kind of revolutionize the type of models that you have in academia. How dangerous is that, and how much of it do you think is there like a balance that's needed? Like, what is your perspective on that, putting yourself in your projects for your clients? Thank you.
So I think it's something that's really important. I think that when people try to downplay their identity, then we end up actually producing work that is wishy-washy and is not relevant to anyone. Whereas, so frankly, people are asking me right now about design thinking because of my identity. So because I'm a Black woman, because I'm not from the US, because, it's all because I'm a mother, all of these different levels of my identity are what people are interested in hearing about design thinking from me for. And if I was trying to reproduce the kind of design thinking conversation that they were accustomed to, I mightn't do it well. So there is a whole area of research, particularly qualitative research, where people want you to bring your identity in, because there are other people you're speaking to with similar identities, or other people who can relate to you, even if their identities aren't similar. That's what makes you relatable to them. To talk about something else, I'm involved in a conference right now, and the conference has a lot of people. We purposely wanted people from all over the world to participate in this conference, and there were some papers that we wanted to accept, but we just felt that people were kind of squashing their identity. And really what I'm trying to say is that you can't, there are just some areas that you can't do good work, or you can't do revolutionary work if you don't bring your identity in. So we have to feel confident to do that. I mean, there might be some spaces where identity is not required, but the thing is, so many of us think that it's such an integral part of who we are that there's no benefit in suppressing it. Janine, I hope that kind of answered something, that was a little bit useful. But I think yes,
Yes, thank you. It did. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Yes.
Good. Do we have anybody else who want to ask a question coming in? Yeah.
I'm just trying to check in the.
Leslie, I see several of your former students in the group. So.
Oh, wow, that's good.
I see Laurie Pascal. I see, of course, Mrs. Gabriel, Vanessa. So. And
I have other former students. I teach in many different places. So,
I recognize Mr. Joe Spalberg, who is here, who is a tourism consultant for many years. I see Lorraine Charles, out of St. Lucia. Lorraine, Joe, all of you guys in the tourism industry, welcome to this webinar. And
yes, I only know Joe's name. You know, Joe and I are in 1 or 2 Facebook groups together. So, Joe, it's great to see you here.
I see we have a couple of comments there.
I see Deborah's in the room now.
Thank you. See, I was introduced to the concept of thinking a year ago, not in the class setting. However, this puts a lot of things into perspective. I see somebody else is saying that they have been zoomed out all for the last few weeks, but they were happy they were able to make it. Marlene Chin was saying, I'm not a designer per se, but I'm in marketing. I decided to participate in this webinar and thought that it would be a good platform to help me use the creative thinking process to guide to how I can approach design campaigns that I can stimulate collective thinking and action.
I see Deborah. Yes, Deborah's in here to chat.
Yes. Okay. Ricardo wants to ask.
Deborah.
Good. Ricardo, you want to come in, Ricardo? You want to ask a question?
No, sir. Mistake.
Okay. I see we have Deborah.
Okay.
Yes.
The question I was going to ask is regarding the pain point for customers, because I am kind of at the end of, I'm in tourism. My business is a tourism-based business, but it isn't as if I go out and get the customers to come to my island. So we're asking, what is the pain point for my customers? And I guess I have to look at that from the standpoint that it's people who would not be able to take an annual vacation to the Caribbean, people who will not be able to get this experience of being on this particular island or any of our islands, you know, as we look at for the next 2 or 3 years. So I'm kind of having a little difficulty, like even if I identify that as their pain point. Okay, my goal of taking my work online and selling online, I didn't say it in the goal, but obviously, yes, I want to sell as well. And not just put it online, but to sell it online.
Yeah.
I guess it would have to address that pain point, or at least one of those pain points, to say that.
You might have to dig a little bit more to get a few pain points from different kinds of people, because the reality is that some of the people that we used to sell to, we won't have access to them for a long time. So if you think about like how some of the businesses switch to making masks because they can't sell clothes anymore, it's almost like that kind of switch that some of us are going to have to do. Because we don't have access maybe to the same customers anymore. In Trinidad, I'll give you probably know this example as well, Deborah. The people selling the doubles in the supermarket, not the supermarket, in the gas station, the prepackaged doubles in the gas station. To me, that is like the excellent example of design thinking, you know, where they're listening to the customer pain, where they're saying, people want doubles, but people cannot go outside. And they said, well, how do we solve that problem? So, you know, we're going to have to think of a few different pain points. So it could be the one, if we think of your customers who can't come to you anymore. I'm going to give you the example of people in the yoga studios who are now doing yoga classes online. You know, maybe there is a way for you to be doing a tutorial, or maybe there's a way of you still giving people the experience without actually selling a product. Maybe that's not the answer, okay? But maybe, so I'm just throwing out different ideas. And all of this is part of a design thinking mindset as well, where we are just thinking, okay, how many different solutions can we come up with, and then which one can we work on? So one solution could be then, can Deborah's studio, so, but I actually know Deborah, right? So can Deborah's studio in Nevis have an online experience where people are learning to sew? Or, so that's just one idea. We would put it out there and say, well, okay, let's try that one. Another idea could be, can the studio be teaching people about Nevis through the products or something like that? So not teaching people to sew, but teaching people about the culture or something like that. So that could be another idea. We put it aside. Then we start to come up with another idea. I mean, maybe this is something I see Ola Inca starts to put some idea of virtual reality tourism, right? So, okay, can we then have something where you know, Google has an app. It's connected to Google Maps, where you could film a video, and then anybody with a Google Cardboard, I think, can find the video and look around. So can people visit your studio virtually and have that experience even though they didn't come, right? We still haven't figured out yet the money part of it, but we could start thinking of a few different ideas. And then we could even think of, there's another design thinking technique where people use, where they start off, it's kind of like, so they think of another business idea and then they combine it with something. So you could say, well, it's kind of like Uber for art studios. And then you think, okay, so what does this kind of like Uber for art studios look like? Or it's kind of like, pizza delivery for art studios, you know, just to force you to come up with many different concepts. I didn't really talk about this much, you know, the brainstorming phase. When my students do brainstorming, they have to come up with 20 ideas and more before we actually reach something. So, you know, like Deborah, my suggestion to you would be something like that, you know, brainstorm with a few other people and sobers. Maybe this is something that for us to talk about, a brainstorming kind of activity where, because brainstorming alone is hard, but if we could get people to sit down and collectively brainstorm about ways we're going to get out of this, and come up with many, many different ideas, that could be a way of working. I don't know if that helps. I hope it helps a little bit, Deborah. Okay, and then we could continue the conversation, but it's really, and so it's a couple of different people you have to think of. The ones who you used to work with before, but you also could look at the pain points of the people around you and see what kind of shift you could be doing to address the pain points of the people around you. I read an article recently that also said that there is going to be a boom in local tourism. Well, boom is a big word, but there will be a little more of a peak in local tourism as people aren't going to be able to go anywhere. And so it could be that what kind of low density experience could you be creating for people to come into your studio eventually? You know, there will be local people who are still looking for experiences. I see. Okay, so I think that helps, Deborah, and we could continue the conversation, like I said.
Yeah, I see we have a question in the chat from Alana. You seen it?
I didn't
Alana.
see it. I was looking at
Yeah.
Dr. Dublin, but let me see if I could find Alana's own. All right, so products were shipped in styrofoam pellets inside a bag. Well, I mean, this is a good question or a good comment, you know, that we need to re-engineer to find more local, more eco-friendly solutions. And she didn't say it, but more local solutions. That was one thing that people, that's another thing that people keep talking about in our post-COVID lives. COVID showed us how inefficient our logistics are, that everything is imported, and we're going to need many more local solutions, because if there are fewer flights, it means that it's harder to get everything shipped in and things like that. So that would be a pain point that we're starting to listen to again, that we will find that our the people around us can't get some of the imported things that they used to get. And is there a way that we can somehow fill that need? And the thing is, COVID, this post-COVID life too, is going to change our pricing structure. So it's not even for us to say, well, okay, I used to be able to charge $200 for this, but the locals will only pay $20. It's just that we have to see what are the needs that people really have, and then see how we fill them. All right. Okay. Yes. So Dr. Dublin, yes,
Okay.
design is applicable in many facets of life. What was the other question?
I see Vanessa. Vanessa has her hand up. So can I get Vanessa?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Leslie.
Mm-hmm.
My concern really is like being that mostly everything is happening online, and then you find that a lot of us right now are concentrating on doing our own little websites and all these things. But I'm worried that we may go ahead and do all these different websites and, you know, even take on the cost of hosting websites and maintaining and managing our own different website, when I think that the existing platforms like probably OECS and within collaboration with different associations, that either we could produce a website for the Caribbean that we know that, okay, the creatives, you want to find the creatives and you can find them on that platform, you know, and it will be linked to probably their personal Facebook page, their personal Instagram or something of that sort. Because I'm worried that we're going to all go into the expense of actually going out there and developing websites for online sales and all these different avenues, when we could join together collectively and do one thing. Like, for instance, we have the Arts and Craft, Dominica Arts and Craft Producers Association. And let me boast that our website was funded by OECS EDU. I think it was a competition or something of that sort, and DACPA came out number one. So our website was funded by OECS EDU, and we did a very good job because they told us we did a very good job. And we're very proud of what we have. And right now we have e-commerce functionality. So instead of encouraging the members to, you know, go ahead and do their own online platform, what we're trying to do is collectively come together and decide, okay, we can set up a shop on the website, because the website was more or less made for information. So we went ahead and we've gotten e-commerce functionality, and we're trying to see how we can train and upgrade our members in, you know, the exposure of the online platforms, because it's not everybody that is tech savvy. So we have to do a few trainings and things. So, and I think probably that is the way that we have to go, instead of all of us trying to take on, because whilst we might be paying $350 to host a website for probably 20, 30, 40 people,
Yes.
right? Instead, an individual go and take on that cost, especially now that we have to sort of like hoard our cash, because we're not even sure what the industry is going to bring
Going
for
to be like, yes.
our products are not in demand as it used to be, you know.
Yes.
So it's just a thought.
So one thing we talk about in design thinking as well is a yes and or a both and mindset as well. So I think that the collective platform is great. And I would tell people, like I don't tell people to play in a lot of different places. I actually tell people to do a lot of web stuff for free. But you know, I think that you can have the collective platform also be available on as many different channels as you can accommodate, you know, mentally, right? And I am very concerned, or more concerned even, with what are the products that you are selling, and are these products related to pain points, and you know, are these products actually going to, are they related to things that people are interested in, that people have said that they need, rather than things that that maybe we think that people used to like. I see Michael's comment here, and Michael, I'm gonna big you up here. So Michael Bonnick is an industrial designer in Jamaica, and also another design thinking expert. So so it's great to see him here. And so, but now you see that there are design thinking people in the Caribbean, right? And let me see what Michael's point was, that yes, we prioritize.
I was told that he was coming on.
Oh, you knew he was coming.
He has somebody else who is on the call as well. So they
okay, yes. Yes.
Husband and wife team.
Oh, good. Okay. And so Michael is at the Edna Manley College. Yes, Michael, I think. Yes. So Vanessa, I agree with your recommendation, and I think that people have to make sure that they are also on the platforms that the people that they are communicating with are on, you know. So I mean, if your people are on Instagram, you have to be on Instagram. And I always emphasize, are the products that you're making tied to needs? Have those needs changed? Because some of the things that we used to make even 6 weeks ago, or for what we made last Christmas, people might not be able to use them again for like another 6 months. So we are going to have to reevaluate the things that we make moving forward, and really start to learn to listen to what people are saying that they need.
Good. I know I want to bring on Oleinka. I know she has some sharing that she would want to make this afternoon. We had a conversation earlier about collaboration going forward, because there's so much of these conversations taking place. The OECS has had its own, Caribbean Export has had some, and many other organizations and groups throughout the region. And so what I want to see is a coming together of some synergies in looking at some of these recommendations, looking at some of those high points to see how we can in fact work together. And I know that she's doing some work with UNESCO at this time. So Oleinka, Darren, can you get Oleinka on? I don't know if she's...
Yes, she's there.
Yes, she's there.
Okay.
Hi, thank you so much, Sobers. Thank you so much, Dr. Noel, for that presentation. It was really, really interesting.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to share that I founded an organization called the South-South Collective, which is a business-to-business collaboration platform for creatives and cultural practitioners across the 134 countries of the Global South. As a part of that, for the last 6 or 8 weeks, we've been having something called Thrive Conversations, which is essentially a platform for creatives to come together to speak about how they are thriving and to share knowledge and ideas. So I've also been involved in a lot of the regional discussions and discussions like this one that Sobers has put on that have been really tremendous and so needed. So thank you so much again, Sobers, for doing this. And the word collaboration, the concept of collaboration, first of all, is rising to the top of as something that we're not doing very well in the region. And I heard so much of it that I thought to myself, let me try and see if I can create a solution. So I created a series of online collaboration spaces. And right now, the themes are related to the Thrive conversations we had. And we had a design thinking chat, because it's not a webinar or training session, they're chats, about 4 weeks ago. So there is a design thinking space. It's a collaborative space. You know, you don't have to be especially techy to use it. It is by invitation only. And so when you're speaking about brainstorming, that's a perfect space for that to happen. It's really an experiment. I have created 6 spaces. You know, there's visual arts, there's performing arts, there's design thinking, there's personal branding. It's an experiment to see if we can somehow come together and collaborate in the way that we say that we want to, but we haven't been doing. So I just wanted to share that space is available.
How do we participate?
So, well, right now it's by invitation only. So I would have to send you an email invite. So I would encourage anyone who is interested in being a part of that collaborative space just to send Sobers your email. Or I can put my email in the chat.
Yeah, put your email in the chat. That'd be better.
Yes.
And then you can send me your email and I will send you an invitation. It's an independent space in the sense that although I am currently the administrator because it's under my account, I don't have to be a part of the you know, the design, the collaboration process, so to speak. So I'm happy to be the admin until somebody else wants to take it over, basically. And so that's what I'm offering. I'm offering that opportunity to collaborate because we say we want it. So, okay, here we go. Let's do it.
I think a brainstorming space is really exciting. Like, and this might be the type of space you're talking about, Olayinka, where like people like Deborah, you know, people who have to rethink the product and the experience can come together and work together.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's really, really needed. So I'm glad to hear about this space.
It has a lot of really exciting features. I am very low tech, so please don't ask me what they are. But it has a lot of really great collaborative features, you know, for people to, because it is a collaboration platform designed for that specifically. So
I want to share, am I brave enough to share this? Okay, no, you could continue telling us about your space with the features that you think that you don't remember, but I want to share, I'm gonna look for something while we talk.
Well, one thing I do know for sure is that you can have meetings, you can share files, you know, all of the basic stuff that you can do in any kind of collaborative space. But it also has a whiteboard feature. So for example, if you needed to have a discussion with somebody and you wanted to illustrate,
yes,
then you could illustrate. You know, that's really important for us because we think with our hands too. And so, yeah, there are lots of very cool features. So I'm just gonna basically put an email in the chat, and then, you know, those of you who would like to be invited to use the space, just send me an email and I will send you an invitation.
And I also put something into the chat, so don't mix up the two things. What I put into the chat is I put in a link to a Google Jamboard, as you talked about whiteboarding online. You know, people keep asking, can you work collaboratively online? And I've been surprised at how easy the transition has been. So if this Google Jamboard means that we can all, for example, go in and put in a sticky note. I'm going to, yeah, we could draw on it. I'll share my screen in a bit. so that people could see, but I didn't want I was a little afraid to do it because it's a risky space as well, right? But you know, people could see here that this is the jam board, and I've done things, nice things, like if we threw out Deborah, if we threw Deborah's question to everybody in the webinar, we have 46 people, and we say something like, what ideas do you all have about Deborah continuing the work experience now that we have no tourism or whatever, the borders are closed or whatnot? And if all 48 of us put an idea in, then we would start to see all of these ideas. You know, it's a collective brainstorming of design thinking work like that I think is really exciting. And I think, yeah, that's what we haven't always done so well. But for me, COVID did that. It forced me to see how we could collaborate very quickly online together.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thanks, Sobers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have passed our
time. Oh, we're past time. Yes.
Slot.
Yes.
So I would like to bring the curtains down on this evening's webinar. I think it has been really a tremendous honor and really exciting time to be with you this afternoon, to share the time with you. And of course, to have had somebody from the region who is so knowledgeable about a subject that seems complex, yet she has made it so much easier for us to comprehend. So I want to say a big thank you to you again, Leslie, because we've been working and we've been on this journey for a little while. I think since 2015, and we continue. So I think this evening, the important thing is you really challenge us about rethinking how we do things. I think that is essentially what this experience is all about, to change the mindset about how we produce goods or services in this region, and how we look at not just about COVID or pandemic, but just generally to see how as a region, as a people, we can in fact engage in new thinking, a new paradigm shift, whether it's in education, whether it's in creating goods, handcraft, or in fashion goods, or in music, in agriculture, that we do not have to do it the same way, that there are new ways that we can do it and get better results. And I think that should help in getting us to come out of the bubble that we find ourselves in currently. So we owe you a lot of gratitude for sharing this with us this evening, 2 hours of your time. I know that you have a lot of great things to do, and to spend the 2 hours with us, quite enjoyable. Some interesting words, you know, pain points. Yeah, yes, this pain points. But there's some words that we know of already, like problem solving. I can call myself being, you know, involved in the cultural movement in the 70s and 80s. And we had a methodology that we were applying at that time using theater techniques. It wasn't design, it's what we call popular theater, but it's the same approach. It was problem solving. It was looking at a problem, analyzing it, coming to solutions, getting people to think through it. And at the time, we were using Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed thinking. Mm-hmm. What we see is we're coming right back to this. Yes.
Yeah, so because the design classes
are still very important today,
prayer.
Like they were 30, 40 years ago. So
yes.
Really, this has been a tremendous experience. And we're hoping that we can continue and to deepen that experience. And as you know, and CBU has engaged you in other activities, and we hope to engage you further as we go deeper and deeper into this world of design thinking. So I want to say that like as you said, our lives will be different after this COVID. And then I think clearly we have to think of ways to redesign the ways in which we do things, to redesign our lives and livelihoods. And so thank you Thanks to all the participants who stayed on and who joined us earlier on. Thanks also to my team at the CBU, my team at the OECS Commission for all the support in communication and in design work. Ricardo, thank you very much. Darren, Pearl, Debbie, and all the others. A wonderful evening. I know some of you probably passing bedtime, but I think that's worth it. Thank you very much, everybody.